Liberty Regional Airport, 8:45 a.m. The sun streamed in through the wide, spotless windows of the terminal, casting clean gold lines across the polished marble floors. Everything was in order. Travelers moved through the gates, announcements hummed overhead, and airline crews passed with brisk purpose. A gentle jazz instrumental played softly through the PA system, giving the morning a relaxed, almost elegant air. But in the far end of Concourse B, behind a frosted glass door labeled Pilot Lounge, authorized personnel only, a storm was quietly forming. Inside, Nathan Miles, a 16-year-old with a calm face and an eager heart, sat quietly in one of the leather recliners. He wasn't dressed to impress, just a clean button-down shirt, black slacks, and a pair of polished shoes. His guest ID badge hung neatly from his neck, clearly marked, Horizon Airlines Career Prep Initiative. Visitor. He wasn't doing anything suspicious. He wasn't even talking. He was watching a documentary on the flat-screen TV about the evolution of commercial aviation. His eyes, bright and focused, followed every detail. From the early Boeing models to the cutting-edge Dreamliners, Nathan soaked in every moment like it was a masterclass. For him, this lounge wasn't just a resting place, it was a symbol, a glimpse into the future he had worked so hard to reach. His hands rested gently in his lap. He had been told by Ms. Dana Cole, the HR rep who brought him here, that she'd be right back after handling an urgent phone call. "Wait here, Nathan. You've earned this," she had said with a proud smile. He believed her, but not everyone shared her confidence. At 8:49 a.m., the door swung open sharply with a brisk click-clack of regulation heels on tile. The warm air of the lounge was suddenly cut by something much colder. The presence of Captain Rebecca Hawthorne. White, mid-50s, tall, with piercing blue eyes and silver-lined epaulets glinting under the fluorescent lights. She had the look of someone who had spent 2 decades in the sky and grown to mistrust everything on the ground. Her eyes swept the room and landed on Nathan. She stopped, stared, then frowned. Nathan, sensing her gaze, stood up respectfully. "Good morning, ma'am," he said with a polite smile, motioning to his badge. "I'm part of the Horizon Airlines Career Prep Program. I was told to wait here." Rebecca's stare narrowed, her jaw clenched. Then her voice cut through the air like an emergency alarm. "This area is for authorized flight personnel only." Nathan blinked, confused but still calm. "Yes, ma'am, I have clearance. Ms. Cole brought me in herself." "Isayo." "Cole?" Rebecca scoffed. "And who exactly is that?" Nathan hesitated. "She's with HR. She said I could wait." "I don't care what someone said," Rebecca interrupted sharply, already reaching for the radio clipped to her blazer. "We have a black kid in the pilot's lounge unauthorized. Get security here now." The words were spoken with surgical coldness. No emotion, no hesitation, like she had identified a threat. Nathan's face dropped. "Wait, what? Ma'am, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just waiting for my guide to return, please." "I said out." Rebecca stepped closer, snatching the ID badge from Nathan's neck. The lanyard snapped with a crack. She flipped it over and scoffed. "Fake. You kids think printing something and sticking it in plastic makes it real? This is a serious breach of protocol. What were you trying to do? Sneak into the cockpit? Hack into a flight system?" Her voice was loud now, deliberately loud, loud enough for the hallway outside to hear. Nathan froze, panic rushing through his chest like ice water. "No, ma'am, I would never. This badge is real. I swear I was invited." But she was already talking into her radio again. "Security to the pilot lounge. We have a possible security threat. Male, black, approximately 16, using false ID credentials. Detain and verify immediately." The lounge's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nathan's skin went pale. Outside the door, a couple of passing pilots slowed down, glancing in. A few airline staff turned to listen, curiosity in their eyes. And then came the whispers. The looks. Nathan stood frozen in place, surrounded by silence and suspicion. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak clearly. "Ma'am, please, before this gets worse, just call Ms. Cole. She's with HR. She knows I'm here. I'm not lying." But Rebecca didn't flinch. She didn't consider. She didn't even blink. "Of course you're lying. That's what people like you do. You sneak, you lie, and then you cry when you get caught." Nathan's eyes widened. It wasn't just the accusation. It was the way she said people like you. 3 words that weighed more than any insult. 3 words that turned him from a student into a suspect. Rebecca turned toward the growing group of bystanders now peering into the room. Her voice rose even louder. Let this be a reminder to everyone. Airport security isn't just about metal detectors and baggage scans. It's about awareness. This is how real threats start. Infiltration, deception, disguises. We must remain vigilant. Nathan's body trembled, not because he was guilty, but because he was scared, not of punishment, but of being judged by people who didn't care what was true. 2 airport security officers arrived seconds later, stern-faced, hands resting near their belts. Rebecca pointed. That's him. Detain him. I want him questioned and his badge verified. Nathan instinctively stepped back. Please, just call my dad. He'll explain everything, please. Rebecca crossed her arms, smirking. Go ahead. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear how his son almost compromised airport security, assuming he's not busy mopping the terminal floors right now. Silence. It hit Nathan like a slap, harder than being grabbed, colder than any shove. He swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears from falling. But his hands were shaking now, reaching slowly into his pocket for his phone. No one in the room moved to stop Rebecca. No one stood up for Nathan. No one asked for the full story, because no one cared. 2 hours earlier, in a modest neighborhood just outside the city limits, Nathan Miles stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the 3rd time. He wasn't worried about how he looked. His outfit was fine. Clean, neat, presentable. But this day wasn't about appearance. It was about legacy. It was about showing up with pride, knowing he'd earned his place. Today was his first day in the Horizon Airlines Future Aviators program, a prestigious pilot career initiative for high school students. Out of hundreds of applicants, Nathan had been one of only 10 chosen. He hadn't gotten here by luck. He'd gotten here through grit, obsession, and quiet determination. From the time he was 5, Nathan had been mesmerized by the sky. While other kids played with action figures or game consoles, he was building airplane models and memorizing flight routes. By 6, he could name every commercial aircraft flying out of Liberty Regional Airport. By 8, he had already written in his school journal that he would one day fly planes bigger than houses, across oceans, through storms. And by 10, he had his first taste of the real thing, thanks to the man who had inspired it all, his father, Curtis Miles. Curtis wasn't just a father, he was a legend in aviation safety. The kind of man whose name carried weight behind closed doors at the highest levels of the National Aviation Administration and on AA. But Nathan didn't admire him for his title. He admired him because of the way he explained turbulence at bedtime, the way he let Nathan sit beside him in flight simulators late at night, and the way he looked him in the eyes and said, "You don't need wings to fly, just conviction." That conviction was tested many times. Growing up as a black kid obsessed with aviation wasn't easy. There were classmates who laughed when he talked about jet propulsion, teachers who subtly steered him away from science and math, a guidance counselor who once said, "Maybe aim for something a bit more realistic, Nathan. How about airport logistics?" But every time the world tried to clip his wings, Curtis was there, steady, unshaken. "You belong to the sky," he'd say. "Don't ever let the ground convince you otherwise." Nathan never forgot that. So when he came across the Future Aviators Program's application, he poured every drop of that belief into his essay. He wrote about his first flight tour, about sitting beside his dad at 2 a.m., learning how pilots navigate using VOR radials. He wrote about the time he fixed a simulation error no one else in the school lab could figure out. But most of all, he wrote about the dream. Not just his dream, but the idea that kids who look like him could be pilots too. That the flight deck shouldn't be reserved for a certain skin tone or background, that he wanted to be the proof. So when the acceptance letter came, sealed in that clean blue envelope, he didn't open it alone. He handed it to his dad, and as Curtis unfolded the letter and began to read, Nathan held his breath. Then came a slow smile, a proud laugh, and 2 words that he'd remember forever. "You did it." Nathan broke down in that moment, not because he was surprised, but because the weight of it all finally hit him. The years, the doubters, the quiet hours with books and charts while everyone else went out, it was all worth it. Now, standing in front of the mirror, Nathan thought about all those moments as he checked the time. 7:15 a.m. His ride was due any minute. Horizon Airlines had arranged for a private airport shuttle to pick up the program participants. He grabbed his backpack. Inside it were two notebooks, a model of a Gulfstream G800, and a laminated folder containing his student paperwork and clearance badge. He glanced at the small framed photo on his desk, a picture of him and his dad, taken on his 10th birthday. They were standing beneath the wing of a Boeing 777. Nathan smiled, then whispered to himself, "Let's do this." At the airport, the process had gone smoothly at first. He met Ms. Dana Cole, the HR manager assigned to welcome the future aviators. She was kind, professional, and even cracked a few jokes to ease the tension. "You nervous?" she had asked as they walked toward the terminal wing. "A little," Nathan admitted, "but excited more than anything." "You've got nothing to prove, kid. You're here because you earned it," she said, handing him the special guest badge and gently patting his shoulder. "You're scheduled to meet your group lead in 10 minutes. I just need to step out and take a call. I'll be right back. In the meantime, you can wait in the pilot's lounge." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. The pilot's lounge. It wasn't open to the public, not even to regular employees. It was where real pilots prepped, planned, rested. Being invited in, even just for a few minutes, felt like a silent nod of respect. He walked in slowly, taking it all in. The clean lines, the polished wood, the framed photos of commercial aircraft throughout history, the smell of fresh coffee and leather upholstery. And then he sat down, turned on the TV, found a documentary, watched. This wasn't just a lounge to him. It was a sacred space, the first physical, tangible proof that he belonged, that all the years of dreaming, studying, pushing past stereotypes had brought him here. He didn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, all of that, his confidence, his pride, his composure, would be put on trial, not by a panel, not by a test, but by a single woman's prejudice and the silence of those who watched. But right now, just for this moment, Nathan Miles was at peace. He sat there like a young eagle in a nest built high above the noise. He didn't fidget. He didn't wander. He didn't know that just outside the door, the one person who could try to destroy him was about to walk in. And he had no idea that later that day, the entire country would know his name. 8:53 a.m. Nathan's eyes stayed locked on the screen, his expression soft with focus. The documentary was showing archival footage of the Concorde, one of the fastest commercial jets ever built. He loved the shape, the elegance, the way it seemed to slice through clouds like a blade through silk. A man could fall in love with flight just watching that bird. Then came the sound that broke it all. Click, clack, click. Sharp footsteps. Fast. Heels. Not like Miss Cole's soft flats. No, these were different. Authority shoes. Nathan glanced up. Captain Rebecca Hawthorne stepped into the room like a storm cloaked in uniform. Her blazer was ironed with military precision, her ID badge clipped tightly to her left breast, 4 gold stripes wrapping around her shoulders like medals. Her expression was tight, skeptical, already annoyed. Nathan stood up quickly, as he'd been taught to do. "Good morning, ma'am," he said calmly, lifting his badge for her to see. "I'm Nathan Miles. I'm part of the Future Aviators program, Ms. Cole said I could." Her glare cut him off. "Where did you get that badge?" she asked, walking toward him slowly. Nathan hesitated. "From Ms. Cole. And who is Ms. Cole to be handing out access to the pilot lounge?" Nathan kept his voice level. "She's the HR manager. She brought me in herself. She just stepped out to take a call." Rebecca crossed her arms, her eyes narrowed. "Step away from the seat." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Step away." Nathan backed up, slowly. She marched forward, reached for the lanyard around his neck, and yanked the ID badge free. It snapped loudly. She inspected it like it was a counterfeit $100 bill. "This is not valid," she snapped. "This lounge is for certified pilots and staff, not for kids playing dress-up." Nathan's jaw tightened. "But I'm not playing. I was told I could wait here until the orientation begins." "I don't care what someone told you," Rebecca replied, already pulling out her radio. "This is a serious security breach. Before he could say another word, she was speaking into the device. Security. Respond to the pilot lounge immediately. We have a possible intruder. Male, black, about 16, wearing unauthorized ID, likely fake, standing by. Click. The air shifted. Nathan's heart stopped. The words were clean, cold, tactical, like she had done this before. He raised a hand, trying to calm the storm before it escalated. Ma'am, please, there's been a misunderstanding. I have my paperwork in my bag. Ms. Cole will be back any second. Rebecca's voice rose loud enough for the hallway. No paperwork excuses infiltration. And frankly, young man, your attitude is almost as inappropriate as your presence here. Nathan took a deep breath, trying to stay grounded. His fingers trembled, but he locked them behind his back. He knew better than to talk back. He knew better than to look angry. He knew the rules. But that didn't make the humiliation sting any less. Within minutes, two security guards showed up. One older man, the other mid-30s, both with radios and stern expressions. Rebecca didn't wait. She pointed like she was delivering a command on the flight deck. That's him. Detain and verify. I suspect he's trying to access restricted airline infrastructure under false pretenses. Nathan's breath caught. Wait, what? That's not true. The younger officer stepped forward. Son, we need you to come with us and answer some questions. Nathan instinctively stepped back. Please, call Ms. Cole. She'll explain everything. Rebecca smirked. You can try calling whoever you want, but that won't change the facts. And then, as if twisting the knife, she added with a sneer, What's next? You gonna call your father? I'm sure he'll be thrilled to come clean this up. Maybe after his shift in janitorial services ends. The insult didn't even hide behind sarcasm. It was pure venom. Nathan felt it. So did the guards. So did the 5 employees now crowding the hallway, watching from behind the glass. But no one said a word. Nathan swallowed hard, fighting to keep the tears from building in his throat. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed, hands shaking. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Still no answer. Rebecca leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching him like he was entertainment. Her voice dropped low, mocking. Any minute now, I'm sure your father will come sprinting in to defend your little fantasy. The hallway crowd grew. More airline staff, couple of pilots, people with coffee cups and name badges, all murmuring. Some glanced at the security guards, others at the badge in her hand. Most just looked at Nathan, like he didn't belong, like he'd done something wrong simply by existing in that room. 10 minutes passed, no one came to help, no one asked his name, no one questioned the accusation. Nathan sat quietly in a chair near the door now, his bag beside him, his badge still in Rebecca's clenched fist. His palms were sweaty, his legs tense. He wasn't just embarrassed anymore. He was afraid. Afraid this could ruin everything. If they wrote him up for a breach, even if it was dropped later, it would stay in the system. It could destroy his recommendation, his scholarship eligibility, his future. Just like that. All because a woman in uniform saw a black teenager in a room and assumed the worst. The security officer finally spoke up again. We're going to need to take you out for further questioning. Unless someone shows up to verify your credentials, we have no choice. Nathan's voice cracked. My father, he works for the NOBA. Just let me call him again. Please, please don't do this. The officer hesitated, glancing at Rebecca. She rolled her eyes. Let him call. Let's get this over with. I've got a flight to prep for, not babysit. Nathan dialed again, his heart in his throat. Then finally a voice picked up, his father's voice, strong, calm, commanding. Nathan, what's going on? Dad, Nathan's voice cracked. He turned slightly away from the growing crowd near the pilot lounge, clutching his phone like it was a lifeline. I need help. They think I forged an ID. Security is here. They're saying I broke into the lounge. They won't believe me. There was a pause on the line, a heavy silence. The kind of pause that only comes when something serious sinks in. Then calm but laced with steel came the voice of Curtis Miles, a man used to commanding rooms full of federal officers and aviation experts. Stay right where you are. Don't move. Don't say another word to anyone. I'm coming now. He didn't ask for more details. He didn't panic. He didn't doubt. because Curtis knew one thing without question. His son doesn't lie. Miles away in the top floor of the National Aviation Administration building, Curtis dropped everything. A scheduled briefing with FAA officials, canceled, a conference call with Homeland Security, pushed. His son needed him, and that came first. Curtis stepped into the elevator, suit crisp, badge clipped high on his chest, and told his assistant one thing. Get a transport ready. We're going to Liberty Regional, and send a message to the Horizon Airlines executive office. I want someone waiting when I get there. Back in the lounge, Nathan didn't feel much relief. Not yet. His father's voice had given him a flicker of hope, but the room around him hadn't changed. If anything, it felt more hostile. Captain Hawthorne paced the floor with impatience, checking her watch, her posture rigid with manufactured authority. The two security officers still stood nearby, exchanging glances, clearly unsure whether to escalate or wait. Nathan could feel the air thickening with tension. More staff were gathering now. A few had taken out their phones and were recording quietly behind their coffee cups. Some looked concerned, most didn't, and not a single person asked him if he was okay. 15 minutes passed, then 20. No one came to speak on his behalf. Ms. Cole was still missing, and Captain Hawthorne was growing more irritated by the minute. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. We should have escorted him out a half hour ago. One of the officers tried to offer caution. Ma'am, he said his father works with the NFA. Might want to verify that before we... Oh, please, she scoffed. Every teenager who gets caught lying suddenly has a parent who works in government. I've heard that excuse 100 times. Nathan said nothing. He sat quietly, hands clasped, staring at the floor. But inside his mind was racing. Please get here in time. Please let them see who I really am. Please don't let this ruin everything. He didn't cry, not because he wasn't scared, but because he refused to let Captain Hawthorne see it. Then it happened. The lounge door opened, not quickly, not with drama. It was a quiet, deliberate push, and in stepped Curtis Miles. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. His badge gleamed from the lapel. Behind him, two sharply dressed federal escorts followed without a word. The entire room went still. Even the air paused. Captain Hawthorne turned, expecting perhaps another staff member or some flustered parent. But the moment her eyes met Curtis Miles's face, her expression cracked. Just slightly. But enough. She knew that face. Everyone in aviation did. Curtis scanned the room with the precision of a trained investigator. His gaze passed over the staff, the pilots, the officers, and then locked on Nathan, his son, sitting like a suspect in the middle of a room full of judgment. Curtis stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of a courtroom. Who's in charge here? Captain Hawthorne cleared her throat. I am. Captain Rebecca Hawthorne, Horizon Airlines. Curtis nodded once. I'm Curtis Miles, Senior Director of Federal Aviation Oversight and Compliance. This is my son, Nathan Miles. I understand he's been accused of forging identification and unlawfully entering a restricted area. The two security officers stood upright, visibly startled. One of them whispered something quickly into his radio. Hawthorne's tone shifted slightly, less aggressive now. Mr. Miles, I didn't know he was your son. That's not what I asked, Curtis interrupted, his voice sharp enough to slice glass. I asked what proof you had when you accused him of forgery and called security on a minor with a valid access badge. Hawthorne opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Nathan's eyes widened, not just because his father had arrived, but because the power in the room had shifted instantly. For the first time that morning, someone was standing between him and the injustice. Curtis continued, voice measured but cold. Did you verify his badge with HR? Did you call Ms. Dana Cole before initiating a security alert? Or did you assume, based on nothing more than his age and the color of his skin, that he was a threat? Murmurs rippled through the lounge. Someone in the back lowered their phone. The officers looked deeply uncomfortable. Hawthorne flinched. I acted based on standard procedure. Your procedure, Curtis snapped, just humiliated a federally approved program participant, one who was properly cleared through both your company and the NDBA. And you've done it in front of pilots, staff, and now a growing online audience. His eyes flicked to the phone still held by some bystanders. Curtis turned to the security guards. This matter is now a federal personnel investigation. You're no longer needed here. They nodded, stepping back, quickly muttering something into their radios. Then Curtis faced his son. His expression softened. "You okay?" Nathan nodded, but his voice broke. "They didn't believe me." Curtis put a firm hand on his shoulder. "They will now." The room stayed silent. No one moved. Captain Hawthorne stood stiff, eyes darting, lips pressed tight. Curtis took one step toward her. "You can expect an immediate review of your conduct, and I'll personally recommend your suspension pending formal investigation. This is not the first time your name has come across my desk regarding complaints of bias." Gasps from the crowd. Rebecca's face turned pale. She tried to speak, but Curtis raised a hand. "Don't explain now. Save it for the hearing." Then gently he turned back to Nathan. "Let's go. You don't belong here anymore. You belong up there." He nodded toward the large windows. Outside, a jet began taxiing down the runway. Engines roaring, wings wide open. Curtis Miles didn't yell. He didn't need to. Every word he spoke carried the weight of a man who didn't just know the rules, he helped write them. And in that lounge, surrounded by stunned pilots, trembling staff, and two deeply uncomfortable security officers, Captain Rebecca Hawthorne was suddenly no longer in command. But Curtis wasn't done. Not yet, because facts matter, and so does evidence. He turned to one of the men in suits who had followed him in Agent Noah Patel, head of internal compliance for the NOA. "Run the tape," Curtis said calmly. "Let's show everyone exactly what happened here." Noah nodded, tapped his tablet, and within seconds, the large monitor on the lounge wall, normally reserved for flight status and safety reminders, flickered to life. The room quieted as the footage began to play. The moment of truth had arrived. Camera 14, pilot lounge entry hallway. Timestamp, 8:42 a.m. There was Nathan, walking beside Ms. Dana Cole, HR manager. She smiled, handed him his guest badge, and personally swiped her keycard to open the lounge door. She pointed to a chair near the TV, gestured for him to sit, and then walked back out of frame, clearly saying she'd return shortly. No ambiguity, no trick, no sneaking, just a young man being treated with the respect he had earned. Then came the next clip. Camera 14B, inside pilot lounge. Timestamp, 8:53 a.m. Nathan sat quietly, eyes on the television, hands folded in his lap. He didn't move, didn't wander, didn't touch a thing. Minutes passed, then the door opened. Captain Hawthorne entered, looking visibly annoyed before even seeing him. She spotted Nathan, approached, and that's when the room watched the moment unfold with their own eyes. She yanked his badge, ignored his explanation, spoke into her radio, and pointed at him like he was a criminal. Her expression? Disdain, suspicion, the kind you can't teach, the kind that comes from something deeper. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some staff looked down at their shoes. A few shook their heads slowly. One pilot muttered under his breath, "That's not right." Curtis didn't speak. He let the video play. But Nathan stared straight ahead. His chest rose and fell slowly, because now everyone saw it, not a version of it. Not a twisted retelling train, but the cold, unfiltered reality. He had been profiled, humiliated, and dismissed all for daring to exist in a space not meant for him. As the video ended, the screen went dark. The silence was heavier than before. Rebecca Hawthorne stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out, because there was nothing left to say. Curtis turned slowly toward the room, his voice low and controlled. "Is there anyone here? Anyone who still believes my son forged that badge?" No one answered. No one could. He turned to the security officers. "You detained a federal program participant based on a false assumption, without verification, without cause." The older officer stammered, "Sir, we were following protocol based on the captain's alert." Curtis nodded, but his voice was sharper now. "Protocol is not a substitute for judgment, especially when bias is involved." Then he faced Hawthorne again. "You escalated a situation based on nothing but your personal prejudice. And when challenged, you doubled down, attempted to humiliate him further, and made false public accusations that could have destroyed a young man's future." Her hands trembled slightly. "I didn't know. I thought—" Curtis cut her off. "You didn't think. That's the problem." He turned to Agent Patel. "Begin formal documentation. I want a full ethics investigation, going back at least 3 years. Any prior complaints against Captain Hawthorne? Gather them all. Patel nodded. Already in progress, sir. At the back of the room, someone spoke, softly. I remember. She reported a black baggage handler last year, said he lingered too long near the gate. Turned out he was waiting for his break. Another voice joined in. She once accused a pilot trainee from Mexico of snooping. The guy was just checking engine readouts. The floodgates opened. Hushed stories, whispers, moments that had been ignored or silenced were finally being spoken. Rebecca's face went red, then pale. The room she once ruled had turned on her. Curtis turned to Nathan. Son, stand up. Nathan rose slowly, still shaken but with his back straight. You didn't do anything wrong, and I want every person in this room to understand this. We're not just clearing a misunderstanding, we're confronting a culture. His eyes scanned the faces in the room. When a kid who looks like my son is treated like a suspect before a student, like a threat before a trainee, that's not policy, that's prejudice. And prejudice has no place in aviation or anywhere else. Murmurs of agreement filled the lounge. Some nodded, others simply stood silent, the weight of their silence earlier now heavy on their shoulders. Curtis stepped forward one last time, facing Rebecca directly. You don't get to hide behind your rank. Not anymore. You tried to bury my son's dream under your bias, and you just learned you picked the wrong family. Rebecca couldn't speak. Her arms hung limp at her sides. She had nothing left to say. Just then, the door opened again. Ms. Dana Cole rushed in, breathless, phone still in hand. I just got the alert. What happened? Nathan looked at her. They said I didn't belong here. She blinked. I brought him in. I verified his ID myself. I left for 10 minutes. What? Curtis raised a hand gently. It's been handled. She looked around the room, the fallen captain, the security team, the silent crowd, and understood instantly. Curtis nodded once to his agents. Escort Captain Hawthorne out of this facility. Effective immediately, she is suspended pending investigation. The room parted as the agents moved toward her. No one stopped them. No one objected. Rebecca lowered her head and walked. And for the first time in her long career, no one followed. As the heavy glass doors of the pilot lounge swung closed behind Captain Rebecca Hawthorne, the room remained completely silent. No one clapped. No one celebrated. But the tension, the cold, rigid fear that had filled every corner, finally broke like morning fog. Curtis Miles watched her disappear down the hallway, flanked by 2 federal agents. Her once commanding stride now looked hollow, uncertain. And just like that, the woman who had nearly destroyed his son's future in under 30 minutes was gone. Curtis turned back to the lounge where his son Nathan stood still, shoulders tight, fists still clenched slightly. Son, Curtis said gently, stepping close. It's over. Nathan looked up at him, his voice low but steady. Is it really? Curtis didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his suit jacket and handed Nathan his ID badge. Not the fake one Captain Hawthorne had claimed, his real one. Clean, official, verified. You held your ground, Curtis said. You didn't fold. That's what matters. And then he turned to the airline staff, the pilots, the onlookers. Some still frozen in place with their phones, some already looking down, ashamed. And his voice changed from father to federal official. This incident won't be buried. Horizon Airlines will be cooperating fully with a federal investigation into internal culture, protocol enforcement, and officer conduct. Anyone who has experienced similar treatment is encouraged to come forward, anonymously or directly. We will listen, and we will act. He looked to the security officers. We need to change the way we respond to alerts. A young black student sitting quietly with an ID badge should not trigger a full-scale security breach. That's not vigilance. That's bias. One of the officers lowered his gaze. The younger one, visibly shaken, gave a small, respectful nod. Then Curtis turned back to the cameras because now they were rolling. Local media had picked up the commotion and were already outside the lounge. And before anyone could misreport the story or spin it into routine misunderstanding, Curtis was ready to go public. He walked to the doorway, the crowd of reporters waiting behind velvet ropes, microphones raised like weapons, waiting for a soundbite. Curtis stood tall. Nathan stood beside him. And then Curtis Miles spoke not just as a father or a federal director, but as a voice for every young black kid who's ever been told he didn't belong. This morning, my son Nathan Miles was humiliated, interrogated, and publicly accused of criminal activity while participating in a federally approved aviation training program. He was racially profiled. He was disrespected by a senior airline captain who chose assumption over verification, prejudice over protocol, and pride over professionalism. And she did it in full view of staff, passengers, and colleagues without a single person stepping forward to stop her. That ends today. Cameras clicked. The room behind him was silent. Nathan stood still, his chin lifted. This isn't just about one badge or one mistake. It's about how often young black men are treated as intruders before they're seen as students, as criminals before they're seen as candidates, and how, in places that claim to value safety and precision bias, still flies under the radar. He paused, then added, "Let me be clear. Aviation is not just about planes, it's about people. And we will not allow the skies to be ruled by the same silent prejudices that pollute the ground." Reporters leaned in. Some nodded slowly. Others lowered their microphones, stunned. Nathan could feel the shift. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger than that. Curtis continued, "Effective immediately, Captain Rebecca Hawthorne is suspended from all flight duties pending a full investigation. Horizon Airlines has agreed to cooperate with the FAA to review all staff conduct protocols, reporting systems, and diversity training programs." A few gasps from behind the rope line. Furthermore, the FAA will be launching a nationwide campaign called Equal Altitude, aimed at making aviation career paths more inclusive and accessible to underrepresented youth across America. Now the cameras surged forward. That was a headline. Curtis finished with one final look at his son. "My son's dream nearly got crushed today, but instead of breaking, he held his head high. He didn't scream, he didn't run, he stood his ground. And now we're going to make sure every kid who dares to dream of the sky never has to fight just to be seen." The press conference ended not with applause, but with something more powerful, respectful silence. Nathan and Curtis turned and walked back into the terminal as the crowd parted before them. No one sneered now. No one laughed. No one dared look away. Nathan glanced at the badge still in his hand. For the first time since that awful moment in the lounge, it felt real again. It meant something again. Back inside the executive offices, Ms. Dana Cole caught up to them. "I'm so sorry, Nathan," she said, her voice shaking. "I never should have left you alone in there." Nathan nodded slowly. "It's not your fault. You treated me with respect. That's more than most people did today." She smiled gently. "I just got off a call with corporate. They've asked if you'd be willing to speak at the closing ceremony for the program." Nathan blinked. "Me?" "You," she said. "They think your story could inspire the entire next generation." He looked to his father. Curtis didn't say a word. He just nodded. Nathan smiled, not wide, but deep, a quiet kind of victory. Later that afternoon, as Curtis prepared to head back to D.C., he pulled Nathan aside. "Today was hard," he said, "but what you did, how you carried yourself, that's the part I'll never forget." Nathan looked up at him. What if she hadn't been caught? What if no one believed me? Curtis laid a strong hand on his son's shoulder. "Then we still fight. We always fight. But you never let them change who you are. Never let their fear become your silence." Nathan nodded slowly. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about becoming a pilot anymore. It was about what kind of pilot he would be. The kind that lifts others up. The kind that speaks truth. The kind that never forgets what it felt like to be doubted. The sun was setting behind the glass walls of Liberty Regional Airport, casting long golden streaks across the floor. Nathan Miles stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching the tail of a Boeing 787 rise into the fading sky like a metallic monument to dreams. His dream. The last 12 hours had been a whirlwind humiliation, confrontation, vindication. And now, standing beside the runway, badge back around his neck, Nathan was finally breathing freely. But something had changed. He wasn't just thinking about himself anymore. He was thinking about every kid who'd ever walked into a room and been looked at like a threat instead of a future. Back inside the terminal, as Curtis Miles wrapped up the final logistics with his agents and airline executives, Nathan stayed near the observation windows, quietly taking in the view. That's when he heard a voice behind him. Confident, warm, smooth like wind through steel. Nice view, isn't it? But even better from the cockpit. Nathan turned around. She wore a navy blue pilot uniform, 4 golden stripes gleaming on her shoulders. Her brown skin glowed in the evening light. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun. Her presence? Commanding but kind. I'm Captain Amara Grant. I fly the Dreamliner you're staring at. Nathan's eyes widened. You're a captain? She smiled. 21 years in the sky, kid. Still get goosebumps every time I take off. She extended a hand. Nathan shook it gently, but with purpose. I saw what happened today, she said. You held your ground. That takes guts. Takes grace, too. Nathan looked down, slightly embarrassed. I didn't do anything special. I just didn't want to be treated like I didn't belong. Amara nodded. And that's exactly why you do belong. She gestured toward the gate. You ever been in the cockpit of a Dreamliner? Nathan blinked. No, only in simulators. Good, she said with a grin. Time to change that. He followed her through a secured door, escorted by a flight officer who clearly recognized her, and waved them through without question. As they entered the aircraft, the world around Nathan seemed to slow down. He stepped inside the cockpit and gasped. The glowing instruments, the panoramic digital displays, the dual-yoke controls and the silence, the focused silence of command. Amara slid into the captain's seat. You see all this? She said, running her hand across the panel. It's beautiful, powerful, but none of it matters without the right person in the seat. She looked him dead in the eyes. You've got what it takes. You didn't flinch. You didn't get loud. You didn't back down. That's what this job needs. That's what the sky needs. Nathan felt his chest tighten, not with fear, with something he hadn't felt all day. Belonging. Amara stood and motioned toward the seat. Go ahead, sit down. He hesitated, then eased himself into the pilot's seat. It felt like stepping into his own skin. The controls beneath his fingers didn't feel foreign. They felt familiar, destined. You know what they say about this seat? She asked. It doesn't care where you come from, doesn't care what color your skin is. It only cares if you are prepared, if you are disciplined, if you know who you are. Nathan swallowed. I want this more than anything. She smiled. Good, then keep going, and don't ever let a uniform or a title scare you out of your place. Nathan turned his head slowly, eyes tracing the view through the curved cockpit glass. He could already see it, not just the sky, his future. Back on the ground as they walked side by side along the jet bridge, Amara said something that stopped Nathan in his tracks. I've been asked to mentor the next round of future aviators. I said yes, on one condition. Nathan looked up. That you'd be my co-lead, co-mentor. Nathan blinked. Me? Why not you, she said, folding her arms. You've already done more in one day than most adults do in a lifetime. You've led, you've endured, and most importantly, you've inspired. He stared at her, speechless. Amara chuckled. Don't say no now, I already put your name on the program materials. Nathan broke into a laugh, his first real one all day. Later that night, in a quiet hotel room provided by Horizon Airlines for debriefing, Nathan sat at the desk. He opened his laptop and pulled up a blank document. At the top, he typed, Wings of Change, Notes for Future Aviators. And then he began writing, not just about instruments and engines, but about courage, integrity, resilience, and the danger of silence in the face of bias. He didn't write to complain. He wrote to teach, to protect, to open doors wider than they'd been for him. Meanwhile, Curtis Miles sat in his office at the National Aviation Administration building. Emails flooded his inbox, messages of support, parents, pilots, policy leaders. But one caught his eye. Subject, proposal, National Youth Aviation Ambassador. Inside was a drafted statement from the FAA team, a new title, a new role, and a single name at the top, Nathan Miles. Curtis leaned back in his chair. His son wasn't just surviving, he was rising. 2 days later, Nathan stood on a stage in front of an auditorium packed with Horizon Airlines staff, media, and future aviators. He wore a fitted blazer. His badge gleamed. His voice didn't shake. A few days ago, I walked into an airport, decided to chase my dream. And in under 15 minutes, I was treated like a threat. But I didn't come here today to talk about what broke me. I came to talk about what built me. Eyes in the crowd widen, some welled with tears. Because when you go through fire and come out standing, you realize it's not enough to chase your own dream. You have to clear the runway for others too. Curtis sat in the front row. Amara stood nearby, arms crossed, smiling wide. No kid should ever be silenced because of what they look like. No student should be doubted before they're heard. And no dream should be grounded by ignorance. He paused, looked out across the faces. I'm Nathan Miles. I'm the son of Curtis Miles. I'm a pilot in training, and I belong in the sky. The crowd rose in a wave of applause. Not polite, not forced, but earned. The news traveled faster than any plane could fly. Within 48 hours of Nathan Miles's speech, hashtags like #equal-altitude, #NathanMiles, and #Wings of Change began trending across the country. Major networks aired the bulk clip of Nathan's quiet yet powerful declaration. No dream should be grounded by ignorance. And behind the scenes, a movement was building, led by someone who had quietly worked for decades to make the skies safer. Now he was working to make them fairer. Curtis Miles stood at the podium of the National Aviation Administration's main auditorium in D.C., flanked by federal leaders, airline executives, and training directors from every major carrier in the country. But his eyes scanned past the cameras and officials, landing on the front row, where his son sat in a clean, sharp black blazer, a silver pin on his collar reading Youth Aviation Ambassador, NOAA. The title was official, the mission was urgent. Curtis took a breath, then addressed the nation. For too long, the aviation industry has failed to reflect the diversity of the world it flies over every day. We've talked about safety, about speed, about innovation, but we haven't talked enough about access, opportunity, equity. He gestured toward Nathan. My son's experience isn't isolated, it's systemic. And today we're taking bold steps to make sure no student is ever denied their seat before they've even entered the cockpit. Curtis outlined the program, Equal Altitude, a national initiative for aviation equity and opportunity, full scholarships for underrepresented youth in aviation prep programs, partnerships with high schools in urban and rural communities, mandatory unconscious bias training for airline staff and flight crews, a new anonymous incident reporting system managed jointly by both NOAA and FAA, quarterly audits on diversity practices across all commercial airline operations, and most importantly, youth ambassadors like Nathan who would travel, speak, and represent the future of aviation. The crowd stood in ovation, not just for Curtis, but for what the moment symbolized: a shift, a reckoning, a rising. Back home, Nathan barely had time to rest. He was invited to speak at schools, flight clubs, and youth centers from Atlanta to Seattle. At every stop, students lined up afterward, not for autographs, but for courage. You made me feel like I could actually belong here, one girl told him in Houston. I didn't know people like us could be pilots, a boy whispered in Newark. Nathan always smiled, leaned in, and said the same thing. We don't just belong, we're needed. Why each event ended the same way. Nathan inviting kids to take a photo while pretending to steer an imaginary plane. He called it the captain pose, and every time the room lit up. Meanwhile, Curtis kept pushing from inside the system. The investigation into Captain Rebecca Hawthorne had revealed a troubling Pattern 3 formal complaints and several internal warnings related to racial bias, all ignored over the years. The NABA, under Curtis' directive, made a public example of the case. If you're given authority and use it to diminish others instead of elevate them, you don't belong in aviation leadership. You belong on the ground. Hawthorne's license was formally suspended for 5 years, but Curtis wasn't focused on punishment. He was focused on prevention. He mandated every certified airline partner in the Equal Altitude program to report quarterly training logs and outcomes, not just box-checking sessions, but real results. For Curtis, this wasn't about one incident. This was his legacy. And for Nathan, that legacy became personal. He was no longer just writing essays or building models. Now he was mentoring. Back at the Future Aviators program, Nathan began leading workshops with Captain Amara Grant. The two formed an unstoppable pair: Amara's experience and quiet fire, Nathan's empathy and conviction. One afternoon, a shy, soft-spoken boy named Jaden sat in the back of the classroom, hesitant to ask a question. Nathan walked over, crouched next to him, and smiled. "What's on your mind?" Jaden looked down, then whispered, "What if they look at me like they looked at you?" Nathan didn't flinch. "Then you look right back," he said, "and show them who's going to be flying over their heads." That night, Nathan received a letter handwritten, folded neatly in an envelope. It read, "Nathan, I watched everything unfold from the shadows of my own mistake. I've had weeks to sit with what I did, and I want you to know I was wrong, not just about your badge, about you, about what I assumed. I've stepped away from aviation, but I'm working with a local program on my own time now, helping youth with simulator training. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll believe I learned something from you. Russ Hawthorne." Nathan read the letter 3 times. He didn't smile, but he didn't tear it up either, because accountability matters, and so does change. Weeks later, at a national youth aviation conference in Los Angeles, Nathan stood on stage again. But this time it wasn't about trauma, it was about transformation. The sky doesn't care who your parents are. It doesn't care what zip code you come from. It cares if you know who you are, where you're going, and if you're willing to take the controls. It's not always going to be fair, but we don't fly to escape gravity, we fly to overcome it. The audience exploded in applause. Among the crowd were young girls in hijabs, boys in wheelchairs, students from foster care, kids who had never even been to an airport. But now they all saw something different. They saw themselves. After the speech, Curtis approached his son. No cameras, no microphones, just father and son. "You keep surprising me," Curtis said quietly. Nathan smiled. "You were the one who said I belonged up there." Curtis looked out the glass wall at a nearby plane preparing for takeoff. "I didn't say you belonged up there," he said. "I said the sky would need you one day." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "And now?" Curtis smiled, full of pride. "Now you're becoming the reason someone else will fly." Nathan Miles stood on the tarmac at JFK International, the engines of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner humming softly behind him. He wasn't dressed in a uniform yet, but he didn't need one. His presence carried weight now. The Equal Altitude Initiative had grown from a federal announcement into a full-force movement. 10 airlines had signed on. Flight academies across the country were seeing record numbers of applicants from underserved communities. Mentorship programs were launching in over 30 cities. But this moment, this was personal. Because today, for the very first time, Nathan wasn't just visiting a cockpit, he was going to fly. Captain Amara Grant stood beside him, sunglasses on, her stance firm and composed as always. "You ready?" she asked, nodding toward the plane. Nathan tried to hide the grin stretching across his face. "I've been ready since I was 6. She raised an eyebrow. "Good, because today you're taking off with me in the right seat." His heart skipped. The right seat, the co-pilot seat. He'd trained in simulators. He'd studied flight logs. He'd read every FAA regulation front to back. But this was different. This was real. They walked up the boarding stairs, entered the flight deck, and Nathan took a breath. The cockpit was a symphony of systems calibrated, beautiful, alive. He sat down, strapped in, and watched as Amara handed him the checklist. "Don't just read it," she said, smiling. "Command it." Nathan nodded. His voice was steady as he began. "Battery, on, APU, start. Navigation lights, on." The crew on the ground cleared them for engine start, and moments later, the soft whine of the turbines grew into a rising roar. The aircraft came to life, and so did Nathan. As they taxied toward the runway, Nathan looked out across the expanse of concrete and sky. He thought about that awful morning at Liberty Regional, the humiliation, the way no one believed him, the silence of the people who should have spoken. And now here he was, not only flying, but doing it with the very people who believed in him when it mattered most. Amara's voice broke his thoughts. "ATC cleared us for takeoff. You have the controls, Miles." Nathan blinked. "I do." She grinned. "You do." His hands moved to the yoke, his feet on the rudder pedals. He eased the throttles forward. The engines roared, the runway blurred, and then, lift. The wheels left the ground, the sky opened, and for the first time in his life, Nathan Miles was airborne. Back on the ground in the air traffic control tower, Curtis Miles watched it all from behind the safety glass. He didn't need binoculars. He didn't need commentary. The sight of that jet, wheels up, sun glinting off the nose, was more than enough. A voice beside him said, "Your boy's got a future." Curtis turned. It was the Secretary of Transportation, dressed in a dark suit, calm, composed, but clearly moved. "He's not just flying a plane today," Curtis said. "He's flying through a door a lot of people tried to keep closed." 2 weeks later, Nathan stood at a podium again, this time at the White House. A national summit had been convened on youth leadership in STEM. Nathan wasn't just invited, he was asked to speak. His speech wasn't long, it didn't need to be. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to your dream isn't skill. It's permission, not written permission, but the kind you never see, the kind that says you don't belong. I'm here to tell you, if you love something and you're willing to fight for it, you don't need their permission. He looked toward the back row where students from aviation academies in Chicago, Detroit, and rural Mississippi sat wide-eyed. You just need your wings and someone to show you where the runway is. The room stood as he stepped away from the mic. Even the president nodded with a small smile. Later that night, Nathan sat alone in his hotel room, overlooking D.C. On the desk in front of him was a worn-out notebook, the one he'd started writing in the night of the Liberty Regional incident. He flipped to the back and began a new page. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind, it's about what you lift up. Then he wrote 3 more names, kids he had met on his speaking tour, kids who told him they wanted to be pilots because of him, kids who would one day take his seat. The next morning, Curtis and Nathan sat together at a small cafe before their flights. Curtis sipped his coffee slowly, then asked, "You thinking about what's next?" Nathan nodded. "I want to start a program of my own, one that doesn't just inspire kids but trains them. Real simulators, real mentors, real skills." Curtis smiled. "You want to build a flight school?" "I want to build a movement," Nathan said. "One that starts before the application, before the interviews. One that tells every kid, you were meant for this, and here's how to get there." Curtis reached across the table, gripped his son's hand firmly. "Then let's build it, together." Back in New York, a new nameplate was being installed on the wall of a recently renovated flight training facility, the Nathan Miles Aviation Center, powered by the Equal Altitude Initiative. Below it, a mural of the sky sunrise colors, faint silhouettes of planes, and one small quote across the top. "We rise not just to fly, but to prove we always belonged." Open inside, the halls buzzed with the sounds of flight simulators booting up, students reading aloud checklists, and instructors guiding hands-on sessions. In one corner classroom, Jaden, the boy Nathan had once encouraged, was giving his first co-pilot call-outs in a full-motion simulator. And on the wall behind him, a photo of Nathan in the captain's seat, smiling, eyes fixed on the sky. The sun had just crested over the Manhattan skyline, casting a warm golden light on the glass facade of the brand-new Nathan Miles Aviation Center. A quiet buzz filled the air, students arriving early, community leaders taking their seats, and reporters setting up cameras beneath a banner that read, "Equal Altitude, where every dream has clearance to fly." Inside the main hall, the energy felt electric. Rows of chairs stretched toward the stage, where a modest podium stood. Behind it, a giant mural of a young black pilot lifting off into a blue sky. A quote wrapped around the top of the wall, "Don't let fear or doubt keep you on the ground. You were born to rise." Curtis Miles stood off to the side, watching the room fill. His once quiet vision was now a reality, and at the center of it all was his son. Nathan adjusted his tie in the side hallway, staring into a mirror for a beat longer than usual. He looked different now, taller maybe, not in height but in posture, in presence. He wasn't just the kid who'd once been wrongly accused. He was the face of change, the proof that injustice doesn't get the final word. He was the captain now. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Captain Amara Grant stepped in, smiling. "Time to take the mic, co-pilot." Nathan laughed. "You're never gonna let that go, huh?" Amara shook her head. "You flew that takeoff smoother than half the rookies I've trained. That's not something you forget." She paused, more serious now. "Today's your flight, Nathan. Take it wherever you want." The room quieted as Nathan stepped onto the stage. Hundreds of students, instructors, journalists, and even state leaders looked up at him, waiting. He took a breath, not to calm his nerves, but to center his message. A little over a year ago, I walked into an airport lounge and was treated like a criminal. Not because I said something, not because I did something, but because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged there. No one moved. Even the cameras felt silent. That moment could have grounded me forever, but it didn't, because someone stood up. My father, my mentor, the truth. And because of that, I rose. He paused, locking eyes with a row of students in matching navy blue shirts, all wearing future aviator pins. Today isn't about what happened to me. It's about what we built from it. This center, this movement, is proof that one door opening can lead to hundreds more. And this isn't just for pilots, it's for dreamers, for builders, for kids who've been told no too many times. This is your yes. Applause thundered through the hall. Curtis clapped slowly, proudly, a tear catching at the edge of his eye. And across the stage, Amara gave a firm nod. No words, just full circle acknowledgement. The ceremony continued with ribbon cuttings, facility tours, and simulator demonstrations. Instructors walked students through flight operations. Mentors signed up to lead small cohorts. And parents, especially those who had never believed this world was possible for their children, watched with quiet awe. Nathan wandered the halls as the event settled into a hum. He paused at the edge of the large hangar where a crowd had gathered around a sleek, newly donated training aircraft. On the tail was a single emblem, equal altitude. Suddenly a voice called out, "Mr. Miles?" Nathan turned. A small girl, maybe 11, stood nervously holding her mother's hand. Her curly hair was pulled back, and she wore a backpack covered in plane stickers. I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. "I want to be a pilot, but I thought I'd have to wait until I was older." Nathan knelt to her level. "You don't have to wait," he said with a smile. "You can start learning right now." He pointed to the hangar. "You see that plane? That's not just for the big kids. That's yours too." Her eyes lit up. "Really?" Nathan nodded. "Really." Then he handed her a small silver pin from his own lapel, the same one he wore when he spoke at the White House. "Here," he said, "your first wings." Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the rooms had quieted, Curtis and Nathan stood alone on the hangar floor. They didn't need to speak for a long time. The silence was comfortable, earned. Finally, Curtis broke it. "I always wanted to leave a mark in this world, something that mattered. I thought it'd be a policy or a rule book, something in ink." Nathan turned to him. "But it wasn't," he said softly. Curtis smiled. "No, it was you." They stood quietly for a moment longer, watching the lights of the city reflect in the hangar's glass windows. Then Nathan spoke, voice calm but certain. "I'm not done. I want this program in every state. I want more mentors, more planes, more kids who never thought they'd fly to believe they can. I want them to rise so high, no one ever questions if they belong again." Curtis looked at him, eyes shining. "Then let's give them clearance. Full throttle." And so the story that started with a false accusation in a quiet lounge ended with a flight academy bearing the name of the boy who refused to be silent. Nathan Miles had taken off, and he wasn't coming down anytime soon. A year later, a group of high school students walked through the hangar doors of a new equal altitude campus in Atlanta. They're led by an instructor, young, confident, passionate, Jaden. He stops beside a plaque that reads, "In honor of Nathan Miles, the first to rise." He looks at the students. "Anyone know what the most important part of flight is?" he asks. A girl raises her hand. "Lift?" Jaden nods. "Sure, lift gets you off the ground." Another kid tries. "Thrust?" Jaden grins. "Also important, but the real answer?" He points to the mural on the wall. Nathan standing tall, sky behind him, badge on his chest. "It's believing you're meant to fly." That's the part no one can give you. You've got to feel it, and once you do, no one can take it from you. The class moves forward, the future clear for takeoff. The wind howled across the runway of Denver Aerospace Academy, where students lined up in formation, black flight suits, crisp, patches glinting in the afternoon sun. Nathan Miles stood just beyond the lineup, clipboard in hand, now an official program director of the Equal Altitude Expansion. He watched as new recruits completed their pre-flight checks on a pair of twin-engine training jets. They were fast learners, focused. But Nathan wasn't looking for speed today. He was looking for character. One student caught his eye, not because he was loud, not because he was perfect, but because he was calm, focused, exacting, just like he used to be. His name was Malik Ford, 17, from St. Louis, the youngest of four, first in his family to ever fly in a plane, let alone try to command one. Nathan walked over, studying the boy's form as he completed the walk-around inspection. "Checklists clean," Malik said without looking up. "Landing gear verified. No oil drips, no cracks on the cowling. Static ports uncovered." Nathan nodded. "You memorized that?" Malik shrugged. "No, sir, just practiced a lot." Nathan smiled slightly. "You remind me of someone." Malik looked up. "That a good thing?" "It is," Nathan replied. "That person had something to prove, but didn't let the proving get in the way of the learning." Malik's face lit up, just a flicker. But Nathan saw it. The same hunger, the same fear, the same quiet storm waiting for clearance. That night, after the drills were done and the aircraft tucked in, Nathan sat alone at his desk in the instructor's dorms. The wind outside rattled the windows of the hangar. He opened his laptop. The inbox was overflowing: interviews, event invites, program proposals. But one email subject froze him. FAA inquiry, urgent bias review needed. He clicked. A report had come in from a small regional hub in Texas. A student, black, 15 years old, equal altitude participant, had been removed from a training aircraft after a flight instructor claimed he was too aggressive in the cockpit. The student's name? Elijah Thomas. Nathan stared at the screen, his jaw tightened, because he knew that name. Not personally, but because there were 1,000 Elijahs. He knew the pattern, the tone, the excuse. Too aggressive meant too confident. Doesn't follow rules meant asks too many questions. And I didn't feel safe often meant he didn't look like he belonged. Nathan stood up, walked to the window. The stars above seemed closer out here. He remembered standing in that lounge, his ID badge dangling, his voice dismissed. He remembered what it felt like to be seen as a threat before being seen as a student. And now, it was happening again, to someone new, somewhere else. It wasn't just his story anymore. This was the next chapter. 3 days later, Nathan arrived in San Marcos, Texas. The regional airfield was modest: 2 hangars, a small runway, and a flight academy partnered with Equal Altitude. He stepped off the transport vehicle and walked directly toward the administration office. Inside, the air was stiff with formality. The receptionist stood quickly. The director, a thin, wiry man in his 50s with a white polo and aviators, stepped out of his glass office. "You must be Mr. Miles," the man said. "We weren't expecting you so soon." Nathan smiled politely. That's the point. He didn't start with accusations. He started with questions. "Walk me through what happened, from your perspective." The director folded his arms. The instructor flagged the student as having poor temperament, said he snapped under pressure, wouldn't listen, made the rest of the crew nervous. Nathan nodded slowly. "Did anyone else file complaints? Co-pilots? Supervisors?" "No," the director admitted. "But we trust our senior instructors. He's been here a long time." "Sometimes," Nathan said, "being somewhere a long time means you've had more time to build the wrong habits." The man frowned. "Are you suggesting we're biased?" Nathan didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm here to listen, but I'm also here to make sure what happened to me never happens to another kid again. And right now, your academy is under review." He requested access to the cockpit cam footage from the training session. At first, the admin resisted, but Nathan made one phone call to his father, now Deputy Commissioner of Aviation Equity, and the footage was in his inbox by evening. He watched it in his hotel room. Elijah Thomas sat straight, composed, following the checklist. His voice was clear, precise, never raised. But then the instructor, Captain Rick Dewey, began questioning every response. "You sure that's correct?" "That's not how I learned it." "Don't get cocky, son." By the 15-minute mark, Elijah was visibly shrinking into the seat. By the 30-minute mark, he had stopped responding with confidence. And by the end of the session, Dewey leaned into his mic and muttered, "Kid doesn't know his place." Nathan paused the video, and clenched his fists. The next morning, Nathan requested a full staff meeting, not in private, in the hangar. Public, transparent. Instructors, cadets, maintenance staff all invited, cameras rolling. He stood in front of them and played the video. No voiceover, no commentary, just truth. When it ended, the silence was suffocating. Then Nathan stepped forward. Some of you think the sky belongs to you, that you're guarding something sacred. But let me remind you, you don't own the air. And being first in the cockpit doesn't mean you get to close the door behind you. Eyes dropped, some nodded, others didn't move. But Nathan didn't stop. Elijah Thomas followed every protocol. What he didn't follow was the invisible rule that some of you still carry in your heads. That confidence from a black student means arrogance. That self-control means defiance. That talent means threat. He looked directly at Captain Dewey. You didn't feel unsafe because of Elijah. You felt unsafe because you couldn't control him. Gasps rippled through the room. Dewey tried to speak, but Nathan raised a hand. You are hereby suspended pending federal review. And I suggest you use that time to figure out whether you're here to teach flight or just protect your ego. That night, Nathan met Elijah Thomas in person. The boy stood quietly beside a Cessna, holding his flight bag. Sir, why did you come all this way for me? Nathan looked him in the eyes. Because someone once showed up for me, and now it's my turn. Elijah didn't say anything. He just smiled. And Nathan knew another one was ready to rise. The marble steps of the National Aviation Administration building gleamed under the morning light. Inside, polished hallways echoed with quiet footsteps and the low hum of conversation between policy staffers and senior officials. In a private boardroom on the 9th floor, Curtis Miles stood before a long oak conference table, a digital tablet in one hand, his face calm, but his tone steely. At the head of the table sat members of the FAA, DOT, and several airline executives. Everyone knew why they were here, because the Equal Altitude program had uncovered more than just untapped talent. It had exposed a pattern. Nathan's recent trip to San Marcos, Texas, had set off a ripple effect. Dozens of new reports surfaced, similar language, similar accusations, same excuses, same silent tolerance. Curtis spoke with precision. We cannot build new runways for future aviators and leave the same potholes in the system. We are not just seeing isolated mistakes. We are seeing an ecosystem of unconscious and at times deliberate exclusion. He tapped his tablet. A series of clips and testimonies played on the screen. A young Latina flight student told to lower her voice because it sounded aggressive. A black cadet barred from simulator access after being labeled intimidating. A hijabi student asked if she would remove her scarf before the cockpit. Curtis let the silence settle before he continued. We need more than press releases. We need enforcement. The proposal he unveiled was bold, sweeping, long overdue. FAA Civil Aviation Equity Response Division, CAERD, a federal unit dedicated to investigating, auditing, and holding accountable aviation training programs for civil rights violations, discrimination, and misconduct tied to race, gender, and economic status. Key features: anonymous reporting hotline for students, surprise inspections of training centers, independent investigators trained in aviation and civil rights, mandatory de-escalation and equity training certifications, power to recommend suspension of licenses and funding. Brian Curtis paused, then said something that landed like thunder. We require more screening to board an aircraft than we do to train someone to treat all students fairly in the sky. One of the airline VPs shifted in his seat. Curtis, this is aggressive. Are we prepared for the political blowback? Curtis didn't blink. What we're not prepared for is burying another kid's future beneath the ego of an instructor who never learned the meaning of equity. Across town, Nathan was meeting with Senator Layla Harmon, the youngest black woman ever elected from Georgia. A longtime champion of education reform, she'd taken an interest in equal altitude from the beginning. She tapped the side of her tablet after watching Nathan's summary report from San Marcos. You didn't just make your case, she said. You gave it wings. Nathan gave a soft smile. We're just getting started. Senator Harmon leaned in. How would you feel about testifying before the Senate Transportation Committee? Nathan blinked. Duma, me? You, she said, not as a victim, but as a visionary. 1 week later, Nathan sat before the U.S. Senate flanked by airline CEOs, pilot union reps, and federal oversight officials. The chamber was cold, stiff, cameras rolled, reporters leaned in. Senator Harmon introduced him. Then came the silence, the kind that demands the next words matter. Nathan adjusted his mic. Thank you, Chairwoman Harmon and members of the committee. My name is Nathan Miles. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a student who once sat in a pilot lounge, holding an ID badge, and was told I didn't belong. Murmurs rippled through the room. I was profiled, publicly accused, nearly stripped of the very dream I had spent my life working toward, simply because someone didn't like the way I looked in a place they thought belonged to them. He let that sink in. That experience could have ended my story, but it didn't, because someone believed in me. My father stood up, and then I stood up for others. And he paused, scanning the faces in front of him. I'm here to ask that this committee support the establishment of a federal division to investigate aviation training bias, because what happened to me wasn't rare. It was recorded. And every time it goes unchallenged, we send a message louder than any broadcast, that some kids get to fly, and others get told to wait. A beat, then his final words. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fair airspace, level skies, equal altitude for all. The next day, headlines swept across the country. Nathan Miles calls for national reform in aviation equity. Son of FAA leader brings Senate to standing ovation. New program aims to end bias in cockpits and classrooms. And behind the headlines, momentum. Curtis's office was flooded with partnership requests from universities, aviation tech firms, and community flight schools. Nathan was invited to keynote a major industry summit. The KER proposal passed its first legislative vote with bipartisan support, but the victory wasn't in the votes. It was in the stories that came next. A flight school in Phoenix sent photos of its first all-female simulator team. A rural academy in Alabama reported a 300% increase in applications from Black and Latino students. An equal-altitude cadet in Minnesota, who had once been homeless, soloed his first flight grinning in the photo beside a Cessna. And in D.C., a young instructor named Jaden, the very same boy Nathan once encouraged, was appointed as the first field training auditor under the new KER team. One night, Curtis and Nathan stood once again on the rooftop of the FAA headquarters. The Washington skyline glowed around them. The air was cool. Curtis sipped from a mug, then said, "You've done more in a year than most men do in a lifetime." Nathan shook his head. "I didn't do it alone." "You didn't," Curtis agreed, "but you did it right." Nathan looked up. The stars were out. Then he turned to his father. "You know what keeps me up some nights?" "Not fear," he said, "but the thought that there's another kid out there, just like I was, sitting in a break room, holding a dream and wondering if the sky was made for him." Curtis looked out at the horizon. "Then let's make sure the answer is always yes." They stood there a while longer. Father and son, not just looking at the sky, shaping it. The marble floor of the United Nations General Assembly shimmered under the light of towering chandeliers. Rows of diplomats in dark suits and translators with earpieces sat poised, eyes fixed on the center stage where country flags rippled quietly in the air-conditioned hush. And there, standing behind the global podium, Nathan Miles, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering, his mission, now global. The sky doesn't have borders, but access to it still does. His words echoed across the chamber, translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. Behind him, a large screen projected a montage. Young students in flight simulators, a Muslim girl high-fiving her instructor after takeoff, a group of boys from Gehenna standing beside a donated aircraft with the logo, Equal Altitude, Global Initiative. A year had passed since the U.S. Senate passed KER, and the ripple had become a wave. Now, Equal Altitude wasn't just a national program, it was international. With Curtis Miles working with the FAA and ICAO, and Nathan acting as the face of the movement, partnerships began to form in Canada, South Africa, Brazil, India, and the UAE. Curtis used diplomacy, Nathan used stories, and both used truth. "We're not just training pilots," Nathan told the UN. "We're training protectors of progress, because when a child takes flight, They lift more than their body. They lift generations. After the address, global aviation leaders from Lufthansa, Emirates, and Singapore Airlines approached the equal altitude table with interest and respect. The program's first international hub had just opened in Nairobi, welcoming 60 students in its pilot cohort, many from low-income, refugee, and indigenous communities. The instructors, equal altitude alumni from the U.S. And at the center of the press storm was a headline that couldn't be ignored. From target to trailblazer, Nathan Miles expands equity to the skies above the world. Back in Washington, Curtis stood at the window of his office, watching planes take off from Reagan National. He picked up the phone. "Send him the package," he told his aide. "It's time." That afternoon, Nathan received an unmarked black envelope. Inside, a card that read, "Clearance granted, Class A Commander Track." Below it, a gold embossed letter inviting him to complete the accelerated commercial flight training under the Equal Altitude Honor Track. The location, Langley Command Flight Academy, the elite program used for advanced international aviation missions and training. Nathan's hand trembled, not with fear, with realization. He was about to become the first graduate of a program he helped create, and the first black youth ever placed directly into the Langley Commander Track from a civilian pipeline. Training began at dawn. The academy was brutal, the schedule precise, the instructors unrelenting. But Nathan thrived. He flew in weather simulators that mimicked typhoons, practiced night landings with total engine failure scenarios, mastered advanced navigation systems used in cross-continental travel, and even spaceflight gateway preparation. One night, after a grueling 12-hour session, Nathan collapsed onto his bunk, sweat soaking through his shirt. Across from him sat Aria D'Souza, an Indian-British cadet known for her flawless telemetry and blistering intellect. "You good?" she asked. Nathan smiled, exhausted. "Good enough to fly a cargo ship to Mars." She laughed. "Well, maybe one day." He looked up at the ceiling. "You ever think we're part of something bigger than just flying?" Aria turned toward him. "We're rewriting airspace. You don't get much bigger than that." Graduation came 6 months later. Nathan stepped onto the Langley platform with full honors. Among the guests in the crowd, Curtis Miles, Captain Amara Grant, Senator Layla Harmon, Jaden, now an international training coordinator. But the moment that struck deepest came afterward. A young African boy no older than 11 approached Nathan shyly in his academy blues. He held up a hand-drawn picture. It showed a plane in the clouds with 3 words underneath. Nathan went first. Weeks later, back in D.C., Nathan and Curtis sat inside a top-floor conference room at the FAA. A proposal sat between them. Nathan slid it forward. Curtis raised an eyebrow. "You really want to go that far?" Nathan nodded. "It's time we think bigger." The proposal, Equal Altitude, the Skybridge Coalition, a global aviation equity task force led by youth ambassadors linking programs across continents, sharing data, training methods, and mentorship pipelines. "Think NATO," Nathan said, "but for dreams." Curtis chuckled. "Dream Force." Nathan smiled. "Why not?" The UN quickly endorsed the pilot program. Member states pledged planes, equipment, and instructors. And Nathan Miles was named Global Chair of Youth Aviation Equity, from once being silenced in a lounge to now commanding airspace on 6 continents. His life had become more than a comeback story. It had become a blueprint. Back home, as Nathan walked the halls of the Equal Altitude Center in New York, he noticed something different. Students no longer looked surprised to see someone who looked like him in a place of power. They looked expected, confident, ready, and that was the real success. One of the students, a girl named Jamila, called out, "Captain Miles." He turned. "Yes, cadet?" She handed him a badge. It read, "Future Mentor." "We're starting a peer program," she said proudly. "You inspired it." Nathan held the badge in his hand for a long moment, then pinned it to his jacket. "Lead with care," he told her. "That's the highest altitude of all." That evening, Nathan sat by the Hudson River watching the sun set behind the Statue of Liberty. His phone buzzed. A message from Curtis. "Check the news." Nathan tapped the link. "Breaking, Equal Altitude Initiative nominated for Nobel Peace Prize." He stared at the screen, smiled, and whispered to himself, "Let's fly even higher." The automatic doors of Liberty Regional Airport slid open with a soft chime. But this time, Nathan Miles didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He walked through like he owned the air under his feet. Because in a way, he did. He was no longer the boy waiting nervously in a pilot's lounge with a badge around his neck and hope in his hands. He was the global chair of equal altitude, a Langley-trained commercial pilot, a UN ambassador for youth equity, a name they couldn't ignore. And now he had come back, not for revenge, not for recognition, but to close the loop. The terminal looked the same beige tiles, same curved glass panels, same smell of jet fuel and recycled air. But Nathan had changed. Every footstep echoed with purpose. He passed the old vending machine he had stood next to, trembling the day Captain Rebecca Hawthorne had stripped his dignity in front of a room full of people too afraid to speak. Now, those people watched him on news panels and educational reform campaigns. Some of them still worked here, and they'd be in the audience today. A banner hung overhead near Gate 40. Equal altitude honors. Liberty Regional commits to change. Nathan was the keynote, but this wasn't just a PR stunt. It was the first formal reconciliation event under the FAA's Jetstream accountability policy, which required institutions involved in verified bias incidents to host public forums led by those they had wronged. Curtis Miles, now executive director of Civil Aviation Equity, stood off to the side, watching proudly as his son approached the platform at the center of the terminal. Airport staff, flight cadets, students, security officers, passengers, and even news crews had gathered in quiet anticipation. Nathan took the mic. Years ago, I stood 50 feet from where I am now. I wasn't causing trouble. I wasn't making noise. I was waiting patiently for someone who believed in me. His voice was calm, powerful. Instead, I was accused, doubted, humiliated, not because of what I did, but because of how I looked. I remember the silence that followed, that hollow, painful quiet where no one stood up. But that silence didn't break me. It shaped me. You could hear a pin drop. Nathan scanned the crowd and saw familiar faces. Some of them bowed their heads. He didn't call anyone out. He didn't need to. Today, I return not with anger, but with purpose, because a justice isn't just about calling people out. It's about lifting others up. And legacy isn't what you build for yourself. It's what you leave behind for others to fly with. He paused, then gestured toward a group of teens in navy blue flight uniforms at the front of the crowd. These young people are the reason I came back, so no one ever has to experience what I did in silence again. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, but Nathan wasn't finished. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a folded patch, one that had been torn from his original trainee uniform after the incident years ago. The one Captain Hawthorne had sneered at, fake, she'd said. Nathan held it up for everyone to see. This was dismissed, torn, laughed at. Then he turned and stitched it onto the sleeve of his current pilot jacket beside the equal altitude crest. But now it sits right where it always belonged. The moment hit like a wave. Some staff wiped tears from their eyes. Others clapped quietly. A few simply stared, changed. Then a voice came over the airport intercom, loud and clear. Now boarding, equal altitude legacy flight 101. All youth ambassadors proceed to gate 10 for a ceremonial send-off. Nathan turned to the cadets. That's your flight. They looked to him, wide-eyed. You're not coming with us? One of the girls asked. Nathan smiled. No, I already flew this one. This time, it's your turn to take the controls. As the cadets cheered and walked toward the gate, Nathan stayed behind. Curtis approached, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. You closed it, he said. The full circle. Nathan nodded. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving us right. They stood together at the edge of the concourse as the equal altitude jet taxied down the runway. Curtis looked at his son, proud beyond words. You've built something that doesn't just change careers. It changes what kids believe they're allowed to dream. Back at the podium, a reporter raised her hand. Captain Miles, what's next for you? Nathan took a deep breath. Then he smiled. I'm not the story anymore. The story is what happens when no one gets left on the ground. Final scene, the departure. Nathan stood alone for a moment at the old pilot's lounge door, the very place it all began. He touched the handle gently. It was unlocked now. He didn't walk in. He didn't need to. He simply turned away and walked toward the sky.